Hello and welcome to Dale's Gaming, and we are in the From the Depths designer, and this is not the Age of Sails version. We're now running the standard 2019 version, and the settings are appropriately because I want to have a look at aircraft. A couple of things came up. I did see a post about fast aircraft and balancing them, and I thought I'd go through what I do when setting up a relatively fast aircraft to work within From the Depths, so it works reasonably smoothly for all of its necessary dive bombing or whatever it's set up for. In the background I've got a few aircraft I've already set up ready for one of my new carriers I'm going to be building, a French carrier. And just to go over some of the first bits, the first plane we've got here is my version of the Bruges Allies, and it's basically a anti-submarine warfare ship, basically, and it was used by the French Navy until about 2000. It was from the 1950s until 2000, so it's had quite a good career. Standard turboprop, nothing special. Let me just release it so we can see a little bit of it flying around. So the propeller's a little strange because it has a torpedo that has to launch through the propeller, because unfortunately rails don't drop, if that makes sense. You have to have room to eject them from the rail. Annoying that, but anyway. And I can't have back because it's got a little radar system which was on the real plane. It had a little deployable radar system, and it's got some deployable sonar buoys in these little sponsons on each side, which again was like the real plane. And I've created some, what I'm calling them, AS-12s, which were a wire guided and sort of short-range anti-ship, anti-tank missile. It was a basis of a SS-12, and they made it for a navalised version. Anyway, what I just wanted to show on this one is when you've got a slower vehicle, and this is only going 40 metres a second, it's a little easier and forgiving by just adding extra elevators or rudders, etc., to balance your plane to fly reasonably level. Now it's actually flying a little slower than it really would do because there's no targets around. When it will speed up to about 60 meters a second, but your thrust level, this is the thrust, is I've kept it roughly in level with the mass, but the lift is quite a bit below and forward on this particular model. Not a problem, as I say, because you can just offset it with lots of rudders, and being slow, it doesn't go madly out of control. So what if you've got a plane which is going a little bit faster? And this is my French navalised version of the F8 Crusader, which is significantly faster. So let's just release it from the docking and see how it goes along. So when you've got a much faster plane, now this is only going 80 because it's only running at 5% because there's no targets. It will go as high as about 190 meters a second, so it's pretty fast for a basic From the Depths plane. It's still fairly small. Anyway, the main bit is getting and balancing this thrust vector, which is going straight through the center here, has to be fairly well matched to the mass of the vehicle, and also the drag. So you want the drag also to be at high speed, again level with your thrust, so that it's easy for the rudders and elevators to change direction, because you won't have much time. The difference between it, but when you're going at a higher speed, when you're heading towards the ground, you've not got as much time to be able to adjust your speed in relation to where you are going to where you want to go. So that's my interceptor that I'm using in the fleet. Now I also have a helicopter here, but I want to do helicopters separately. This is my sort of version of a air sea rescue dolphin, but it's not set up with a proper helicopter AI. It's actually using an aircraft AI on this one. It does fly around reasonably nicely, which is what I intended it to be, is to circle the ship and the various areas as a rescue and repair ship, not necessarily going and hovering over a specific point, which is what it would be if I had a pure helicopter AI. But I may do a go through that as a separate build, as about helicopters, how to make a the collective on it, not the collective, the rotor actually do your pitch and roll instead of having to use thrusters. But what I would like to go through is a faster plane, a fast but not as fast as the Crusader. And just show what I tend to set up for aircraft that are on a reasonably fast speed. Now I'm thinking of something in the region between 100 to 120 meters a second on high speed. It will be it's intended to be a attack craft, not an air-to-air, but more of a surface attack craft with some air-to-air capability, but not anti-submarine. So it's going for surface vessels with potentially missiles, I think, rather than guns. We'll have a few guns, but its main armament will be a missile. And what I am going to build is going to be some versions of the Dassault Etendard. So there's a few versions of this out there that were used by the French. The first versions were the version 6M and P. So the Dassault Etendard was first developed. There was a version 2 and 4 which were developed as part of a NATO light attack craft design requirement, and that they didn't win that particular competition, but the French Navy was interested, so they created a navalized version of the Etendard 4 to make an Etendard 6M and 6P. Later, and that served from the 1960s until the 1980s, and then around that time, around the 80s, they then came up with a improved version. They were looking at replacing these particular older craft, and Dassault came up with the Super Etendard, which also launches the Exocet missile. It had a slightly more powerful engine, slightly higher payload, and a much improved avionics over the initial version. And what I'm intending to do is create a version which is potentially mainly the Super Etendard. I'm quite interested in doing basically and possibly a version which is got the higher performance engine, and then a reconnaissance version which would be an equivalent of the 4P, which was the reconnaissance version of the aircraft. And speed wise, these were transonic. They didn't have an afterburning engine. They used the same engine as the Mirage 3, or the first Etendard 6 did, but it didn't have the afterburner. But it still had a fair bit of power, but it was transonic, which means it was just under supersonic, possibly hitting supersonic if it was in a dive type of realm, and in from the depths. For me, that means a speed around the 100 to 120. When you're talking supersonic, you 120s. In my head, I have that as you start having to put significant amounts of power into an aircraft to get it above there and up to that 200 or faster type of speeds. So in this case, we're going to look at a slightly slower 100, 120, and go from there. So first of all, I've laid a block which is going to contain just about the most important part of this in some ways, and that is going to be the custom jet. Now we have got small jets, but the Etendard was a single engine, so yeah, we'll just use one of these in a suitable manner for this particular aircraft. And let's see, we're gonna need, I'm most probably not gonna make this the best possible, for want of a word. Let's see, I'm going to try and make it as, don't get me wrong, I am going to try and make it as best I can. Let's make sure I get the controller the right way around first of all, because if I don't get the controller correct, then nothing else will fit correctly. That looks better, yeah. So on the first time I had the controller the wrong way around, and that's why the air intake didn't connect properly. Now I'm going to go for a few air intakes for efficiency, and then compressor. I want this to be reasonably efficient. The Crusader is a powerhouse. It's producing a significant amount of power, whereas this doesn't need to produce quite as much power in the end. So at the moment we've got we're not showing any output, mainly because we need a few injectors. So we just put, now I'm going to put items at the side on this one, because the design of the Etendard, if you saw it, it's fairly small. I don't want to go over large. The Crusader is quite large, and you've got basically covered in compressors, injectors, and all over. So we'll go with that. How's that going to give us? That's going to give us 2.6. We will try extra combustor. So I first of all put on, let's see, the air intakes and the extra compressors, because there's no choices between those, but on the rear we have a choice between fuel injectors or extra combustors. Now extra combustors will give us a bonus. We're at 34 at the moment, so as an example, if I want to up the power, I put injectors in there. Now we've gone up to 41, but fuel use of 152. So if I then put these extra combustors in instead, our performance is down 246, but max fuel use is 750, so we're much better. So I'm going to go with that. I'm reckoning I might need a bit more than that. I might need a little bit more. Let's just go for there. 3.4. I'm actually thinking it's somewhere in between. I'm actually potentially wanting. I think they'll need about 2.7, 30 to 30. But let's go with that. Let's actually go for the slightly more efficient version, and we'll see what speed that gives us, allowing for the fact we can change these for some extra injectors. Now what I've got to do is build the basic airframe, but one primary is I've got to think of keeping my weight as close as I can to this central point of the aircraft. Sorry, the aircraft's mass at the center point of this engine. Try and keep it on a similar sort of area. So I have the basic what should we say, hull, aircraft body built up now. I'm sort of happy with it, as best I can do with the fidelity we have with 1 meter blocks. It's, you know, in theory it should be a bit thinner, but overall it's got the basic concepts. A couple of laser guided missiles, which are the equivalent, I'm saying, of an AS-30, so that would be quite good, and a couple of air-to-air using the single rail, a single missile rail. I thought I'd give that a go with an air-to-air missile as well. So now we're going to give it a go and try to see if we can get this to fly. So first thing we're going to need to do is give it a bit of an AI. So we'll go through basic AI. We'll just do some adjustments first, and I'm gonna okay, it's definitely in the air. We're gonna give it a generous altitude minimums at the moment until we can work out how it's gonna fly. Right, we're gonna start with, I think on here we won't use the plane, we'll use the airplane movement. Now, banking rolls, what I'm tending to do is start with a fairly conservative number, so 45 degrees, above 30, yeah, we'll leave those as is. Now we'll set initially the thrust to be 100% and a 300 there, and I don't want it pitching too much at the beginning. We'll try it with 10% and pitch towards target. That looks good so far. Now we'll make sure it's on cruise, fleet mode, so it'll try and circle around this point. Now we haven't got any. Let's see if we've got resources, we've got fuel. Might just have to make sure that it doesn't receive new fuel by setting it up to be level 3, so it'll receive resources etc from everything else. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, hasn't gone out the water so far, so I'm guessing it's the controller at this time. Let's have a little look at my jet controller. Yeah, one thing I had to change at the beginning with this ship is, someone may have noticed that I was building it back to front. Be careful when you're building. So when I brought it back in, I saved it, brought it back in, I had to rotate it 90 degrees twice to put it into the right zone. So we've got a nice plume out the back. Let's see if that's gonna pull us up. No, we're lacking some controls. Now it could be something's the wrong way round, potentially. Whoops, that's not good. Let's try that again. So my lefts and rights on one of the controllers, I'm guessing it would be wrong. Now, generally, the thrust is slightly above the mass in general after this build. You can see here that it's close. It's relative, yeah, pretty close. The drag at the moment is showing us slightly below, so it's going to have a nose. The thrust is going to give it a slightly nose down attitude. But I can sort something out with the drag to try and reduce some of the drag and bring some of the drag up a little bit. And we'll go through that. Let's see what's going wrong at the moment on these. So I've got the roll the right way round. They were basically rolling in the opposite direction. Yeah, they're now correct. They were the wrong way round. The ailerons were going in the opposite direction. Now I've just got to sort out the pitch. As you can see, the pitch is trying to go up and down, and it's putting us back into the water. So let's just have a look what we can do on that. So it's now sort of sitting there okay. I had to put a PID in there just to help control some of the pitch. I'm just putting one in for your control as well. And the pitch one, I had to make it fairly quickly, integral only of 2 to make it adapt fairly quickly. And you can see that in general this is really got a large nose down pitch, and I think that's because although the thrust is above the mass, which is giving it a slight note down, the drag is also fairly low. So what I can now look at is where can I basically increase the drag above the mass to raise the drag a little bit, and also increase the mass a little bit just to bring it up. So one way is to put in some metal blocks up a little. So if I replace these with some metal blocks instead, that might just has made as much effect as I would like. So we don't have to find somewhere else to basically either put, or you can even put lead blocks in. So we take, whoops, not that one, we'll take out that, put a lead block in. How's that done to the mass? Let's bring it up a little bit. We don't have to look for some areas to exchange because we've got a fairly low wing here. A lot of this mass is in this wing, so that's the other place I can take some of these out, which is fuel, and replace them in a different place. So we'll put them a little higher up. So the first pass at getting the ship flying a little bit more level has been done. Getting the centre of mass, you can see this centre of mass here is about level with the main thrust now, just slightly below, and I've done that by putting some basically lead blocks at the back here. Now what I needed to do is bring the mass back on the ship. I've added a little bit of lift near the front by just adding a few more lift wings in here, so that gives us a little bit more lift. And that's working at now about 80% power. But what tends to happen now, because the drag is still quite low, if I increase the speed now, we'll put this up to, and I've made it by putting everything into a control block. If I increase our speed, as soon as when it starts going above that 90, the power of the engine overrides whatever we can do with the rudders. Also the elevators at the back. It's just overpowering them significantly. Now it's not just now the rudders. If I put this back down to 80, so the weight is roughly in line with the thrust, with a slight nose down, which is actually okay. Normally a nose down is slightly better for the AI, but the main bit here now is the drag. You see the drag is quite significantly below the line, and we need to bring that up. Now one way to do it is to look at items you can change, or what I'm going to do is just use a glass block and put some glass blocks in front of some of the more aerodynamically okay blocks. And the higher up it is, the higher that drag is going to get pulled up. So it's getting a little closer. If I put some in front of these as well, so yeah, that's brought the drag up quite a bit there. Actually, let's just get level. Yes, that's a lot closer to that correct level now. So this is where the drag is having an effect. Once the speed gets to a certain level, and we'll just increase the speed slowly here. So now we are running at 100%, and because that drag is closer to the thrust line, just make sure everything's okay, it's a little bit more stable. I also had to reduce the rudders were a little bit too effective, and that was actually causing a bit too much roll into the sea, so I had to increase them. But now that is flying okay. We'll have to give it some tests with some combat next, just to make sure it's going to be okay with diving in on an attack. But yeah, this is what I find I have to do, and this isn't a really high speed. This is only, at the moment, the maximum speed's 93, and I do want to get it a little bit higher. So I might just do a bit of work on the engine, just increase the power of the engine just a fraction more, because I do want to get it around the 100 on this particular plane, and then we'll give it another test with some combat once I've done that. But I'm going to have to muck around with the drag and the weight to keep these drag and weight coefficients close to my thrust line whilst I am designing this plane. So I'll be back once I have got the speed up. I'm mostly just going to maybe put another combustor on the back of the engine just to stick it out a little bit out the back. Have a bit of a rework of some of the blocks I've got on the back here at the moment, just to give a little bit more combustion area. Now that the aircraft is flying fairly much level, I've also increased the speed by adding some combustors on the end, so the maximum speed is about 120. I'm also controlling the speed rather than just being on forward. I've got a number of control blocks. Here's one which says if there's no enemy within 3000, go 25% on the speed, which has given us about 73. On the opposite side is if there is an enemy within 3000, go at 75, which is about 110 meters a second. And then I've got a couple more control blocks. Here's one, so if I'm against a high speed target, it will then put my speed up to maximum. And finally, if I am running out of fuel, go down to 10% and enable fleet mode to go back to my carrier to refuel. But next we're going to look at combat AIs, and I want two types of bombing AIs. We've got an air-to-air AI and a surface target AI. So I added two behaviours, so I can have two behaviours on this. Now I'm going to sort out the bombing run for surface targets first, and that's going to be a medium range using the AS-12 missiles. So if we add in here, we're going to call it surface, because it's surface targets. So we're going to say pitch to target. Actually this is going to be quite far out because we've got quite a long range missiles on this, and we're going to re-engage at 2000, and we're going to break off at about 1000. So this is going to be long range missile system, and we'll re-engage. We'll leave it at 15%, see what happens, and the altitude we'll be coming in at will be, let's say, 75 meters. So that's now our surface target one, and to set that, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a couple of ACBs. First of all, we're going to need to set up an ACBs for what if there is no target. So we've got some ACBs here, so we'll start with this bottom one here. So if there is no targets, let's just get the right place. Come on. So if there are no targets within anywhere, so that's the way we're going to say it, no enemy, then mainframe, go to fleet move. And then just above that one, we're going to set the one above it to be the reverse. So if there is an enemy within 5000 meters, go to combat. So that just sets the fact of, is it combat, is it not combat. Next we're going to set the control block on the other side, and that's going to be all based upon the altitude of the target on channel 1. So if the target on channel 1 is from -10, which is must be the minimum we're going to attack, to we'll say we'll say 50 meters for the moment. Yep, 50 meters would be a ground surface target. I'm just worried, the only reason I was iffy about that is what if a target was on land, it might come up as higher. Anyway, set my mainframe behavior to be surface. So now, hopefully, when we get a target, it will say set surface to be the default combat that it's going to use. So now let's give ourselves a target to go against. And just for the moment, we're just going to give ourselves a simple Voltar. And I'm going to turn off the engine's weapon. So that's one laser. Is it designating? The laser has designated, but it's going a little low into the water. Okay, we might need to change something there. That altitude is a little low. So after a little reworking of the dive bombing AI, basically just had to increase the height it comes in at and reduce the range that it started the dive. It's now firing them off quite nicely. The lantern pods laser designating the target, and it's diving in just at the last moment as well. That can be taken out if you don't want the little dive at the last moment. Just increase the pitch distance to something close to the break-off distance. So if I set that to 400, it will effectively just go straight over now in a standard bombing run rather than doing a dive attack, which might be suitable for depending on what you're doing. I did run with that earlier, so it comes down to the height 250, and then it's going to run with that most of the way over. In general, it hits by the time it gets to 400, dives a little bit, turns off, goes away, comes back, fires some more missiles. So that's a good little general attack. So now the final one is I'm going to put in a dogfighting attack. So whilst it's working on that, we're going to use the same. So we're going to use a bombing run, but it's going to be a little different. You could use point out. I don't like the point out myself, but bombing run seems to work. So we're going to call this air target. Come on, air target, because it's going to be basically targets in the air. And we're going to say the altitude is relevant to target, and we're going to set that to about the same, so 20 meters. So it's going to go for the target. Now we're going to have this pitch to target within 800 meters. Break off distance is going to be 200 meters, and it will re-engage when it's at 900. Or after 10 seconds. Now the other one is abort start distance. So if you're chasing something which is just, you're not getting anywhere with it, so we might have the abort distance at say 300, and say if I've been chasing it for 10 seconds at 300, I want to break off and start again because something's not quite right. So we'll go with that, and what we will have to do is change the ACB in here. Where is it? That's the one. So we're going to copy the one below it. I use B. There we go. So we copy that, take it up. Paste that in. So this time we want to say if their height is basically 100 to maximum height we're going to go to is, let's say, 600. If the altitude of the enemy target is there, then we set the behavior to go for air target. Now what we'll need is an air target, and what it should do is it should really only launch these missiles here off. So let's give it a simple little target. It's still actually having a problem finishing off that conduit this time. It's obviously not quite hitting it with the laser missiles, which is a little, it's been deleting these quite happily whilst I've been testing, and now it suddenly has a problem when I start recording the video. Isn't that just typical? So I've launched a little Firefly, and that should have, it's actually, yeah, it's enabled the air target, and our speed is only 75% again still, which is okay. And there's one of our missiles, but they've logged onto a decoy, I think, there, which is a little annoying. I'm gonna have to make sure they actually have got a friend or foe on there. Don't want them attacking at my own ships by accident. Yes, they have a friend or foe connected. And we're firing away, and will the guns actually fire? Missiles didn't connect again, unfortunately. They are trying to connect, but the Firefly is an annoying little aircraft at times. It has that little warp effect. We'll see if the guns will attack as well. No, the guns aren't firing at this time, and we just had a, ooh, that was a bit of a unusual loop there, it did. Yeah, it's doing that downward loop. Now, other people have said about that. I'm not sure why the AI suddenly does that. It's it suddenly just, I don't know, just does a massive surge downwards. Other people actually have said about that one, I think. And after a bit of reworking of the AI, I noticed that dip was only happening when it was doing the break off, when it was below the target. For some reason it was going down instead of up. It's when you're below the target you're going for. So what I've ended up doing is setting the altitude very high and then setting the pitch to target quite close. That way most of the time I'm going to be above the target as I come into it, and have plenty of altitude below me. To hopefully not get that dive. It's still diving down, but it's part of the dive process now, which is okay. It's not highly effective, I've got to say. I did also rework the little 30mm cannon. Working on the sides, they just were not firing, so I've ended up putting it onto a little two-way turret with some little angles. At least it's firing now. But generally, yeah, that's now working. So we've got our speeds are setting itself. It's going at 75 because I've got an orbit there, which isn't the fastest thing around. Our missiles, they're working, but they're not. They're getting a bit decoyed with this particular target. I think if we had more of these ships around, I think it would generally be better. One-on-one is getting there. It's not getting hit back. I've turned off the AI on the orbit for the moment, but it's working. It's a cheap little attack, 15k. So this is going to be a cheap attack craft. It is designed as a light attack craft for the fleet. So we could come in with a few of these, and I think they would then gang up on any target that comes into range, and then potentially take them out. So anyway, that's the end of this particular one. And any comments, as always, leave them down below. Any other little items to add in. AI, I will say this, aerial AI can be difficult to get it right. It sometimes does weird things like that diving down. You just have to find a way around it. I like using ACBs to have multiple AI routines and then have it select the correct AI routine that works for you at that moment. That's the way I like to do it. But it also does come up with setting up the ship, the drag, the center of mass, lift, getting them all correct, or at least centralized, so so they're not too far away from being centre, helps a lot indeed for this for these fighters. It reduces the amount that the AI's got to do, and as you can see, he's now gone onto the ground, so he's going to launch the laser guided missiles, which is cool. I'll see what my next build's going to be, possibly the carrier to contain all of these aircraft, but leave your thoughts down below. As always, keep playing the game and have fun.